What if I told you there's a single key that can unlock over 70,000 doors to the internet's backbone? Well, today we're breaking down a security flaw that does exactly that. And believe me, the story behind it is just as alarming as the vulnerability itself.
So that number you're looking at? Yeah, that's over 70,000 networking devices. And we're not talking about your home Wi-Fi router here. These are the heavy-duty appliances and controllers that businesses and industries rely on every single day. And they're all connected to the web, just sitting there, dangerously exposed.
And when I say exposed, that doesn't really do it justice. We are talking about devices that are completely, totally open. An attacker doesn't need to be clever and pick a lock. The front door has been left wide open for them.
But what's truly terrifying is just how simple this whole thing is. It takes just one single, simple command sent over the internet for an attacker to get total control. And that really sets the stage for what we're about to unpack. A flaw that is incredibly simple, yet absolutely devastating.
Okay, so let's dive right into the nitty-gritty. What exactly is this flaw, and why does it have security researchers so incredibly concerned? So the whole problem starts with this firmware called SXOS. It's made by a Chinese vendor called XSpeeder. And look, this isn't some obscure piece of software. It's running on critical infrastructure. Things like edge routers and industrial controllers all over the globe. If you compromise one of these, you could potentially take down an entire corporate network or shut down a factory floor.
Now this really puts the danger into perspective. That CVSS score, which is how we measure how bad a vulnerability is a 9.8 out of 10. That is as critical as it gets. But the real kicker is right here. Authentication required, no. An attacker doesn't need a password, they don't need a username, they can just walk right in.
And this is what's known as a zero-day vulnerability. If you're not familiar with the term, it's actually pretty simple. It means the good guys and the bad guys all know about this flaw, but the company that made the software hasn't released a fix. So users have had exactly 0 days of protection from a patch since it became public knowledge.
And this is where the story takes a really fascinating, almost sci-fi turn. This wasn't discovered by a human researcher. This is the first remote code execution vulnerability, or RCE, of its kind to be found entirely by an AI agent. Now that is a huge milestone. It means AI is getting good enough to hunt down these supercritical flaws all on its own, which is, both amazing and a little bit unsettling. So how does an attacker actually take this flaw and turn it into a master key for 70,000 devices? You'd think it would be complicated, right? Well, it's not. The process is shockingly straightforward. The whole thing boils down to this: a single malicious web request. It's like an attacker sends a very specific secret message in a bottle. But instead of getting a note back, they get the keys to the entire kingdom. We're talking complete administrative control over the whole system. It's basically a quick three-step dance. First, the attacker crafts that perfect malicious request. Then, they send it to the device, knowing it's designed to just waltz right past any of the basic security checks. And the final step? It's immediate. The attacker gets root-level privileges, which is the absolute highest level of control you can have on any system.
So for the more technical folks out there, here's the heart of the problem. As you can see on the left, the code uses a function called evaluate. Now, this function basically takes whatever a user sends it and runs it as a command. It is incredibly dangerous. And on the right, you can see the device has some defenses, but they're basically a paper-thin wall that this malicious request just blows right through.
And this all leads us to the most frustrating and, honestly, the most dramatic part of this entire story. This vulnerability was found months ago. So why on earth are 70,000 devices still at risk today? Well, the answer is the vendor's complete and total silence.
The researchers who found this, they did everything by the book. They followed what's called responsible disclosure. They contacted the vendor, XSpeeder, all the way back in May of 2025. And then they waited and waited for over 7 months and got nothing back. Crickets. So they had to make the tough call to go public just to warn everybody. Just let that sink in for a second. No acknowledgement of the problem, no security patch to fix it, and absolutely zero guidance for the customers whose businesses are now at risk. Going public wasn't their first choice. It was the last resort to sound the alarm when the company responsible refused to.
So, with the vendor totally silent and no official fix anywhere in sight, the big question is, what are you supposed to do? How can anyone using these devices actually protect themselves right now? Well, here are the recommendations from the experts. And it's basically about building a fortress around these vulnerable devices. You have to cut them off from the public internet entirely. Segment your network so that even if one gets hit, it can't spread.
and you have to watch them like a hawk for any signs of an attack. And honestly, maybe the most important advice? Start looking for a replacement. The bottom line is this: waiting is not an option. With no patch on the horizon, organizations have to shift their mindset to active defense. You have to assume you are a target and take these proactive steps immediately.
And this whole situation leaves us with a much bigger, much more complicated question. In a world where all of our critical infrastructure relies on hardware and software from countless different vendors, what happens when one of them just goes silent? It really forces us to ask, who is ultimately responsible for keeping our digital world secure?